I okay sitting?
You're okay.
You can do whatever's comfortable.
All right, we'll see how this
Yes,
goes.
first.
All right, like Christy said, my name is Julie, and I'm a survivor of postpartum OCD. I'm thrilled to have my husband here with me today. We are the parents of 3 children. They are 11, 7, and 6 years old. And we also got the great opportunity to raise my brother and sister through their teenage years. So while that had a lot of challenges, I believe that having them with us during this whole experience really saved my life. The postpartum experience that I had with my first 2 children, it was smooth, despite a lot of family drama and stress going on with that. It went well. And then when my second son was 3 months old, I found out that I was pregnant with my daughter. So I think that probably played a big part in my getting postpartum OCD, because I was on this pregnancy high for almost 2 years. And 9 months after my daughter was born, I kind of crashed. And I woke up one day in August of 2006 with just an overwhelming fear that I was going to kill my children. And this was just so terrifying to me, and I didn't understand why I was feeling that way. But I was really ashamed, and I was embarrassed, and I didn't feel like I could tell anyone. And so I said, this must be some kind of postpartum depression, and it's going to go away on its own. You'll be fine. So I just got through it. I had a lot of repetitive thoughts and images that would play in my mind. One of the thoughts was I couldn't bathe my children without thinking that I would drown them. And I brought a picture today of, there was one time when I did try to give my children a bath, and I ended up in it with them with my clothes on. They were splashing and I was getting wet, and I was really getting agitated, and I couldn't stop the thoughts. My sister was home, and so I knew we were safe, but the only logical thing for me to do was to climb in the bathtub with them. And then I was wet, and I couldn't get mad that they were splashing me, and it was, it was going to be okay. But, when I look at that picture, in my eyes, I can just see how sick I really was at that point. Some of the other thoughts that I would have was anytime we would leave to go somewhere, I had the thought to not open the garage. Start the car and don't open the garage. And, these thoughts, I could see everything happening in my mind. It was like a movie. And it was so scary, but I just kept saying, it's going to get better. And, after about 18 months, I started to feel like it was finally letting up and that I was going to get better. And then in January of 2008, we found out that I was pregnant. And I was so scared and terrified. Is this going to come back? What's going to happen? And then as we prepared for a new baby and we told our families that we were pregnant, I was 10 weeks along. The very next day after telling our families, I miscarried. And it was such a relief to me. And I was talking to a friend that had had several miscarriages, and she warned me that my hormones and emotions would probably be kind of all over the place and to just take it easy. And so that's what I did. I took it easy, and within a couple of months, the thoughts and images started to increase again and take control over my life. So at this point, I was wiped out, and I knew, okay, it's time to get help. You have to talk to somebody. So I went to my doctor, and I let him know a little bit about how I was feeling, and he put me on medication. And then I sat down with my husband. It was really hard to tell him that for 2 years I had been keeping this secret from him. But I still couldn't tell him everything. I couldn't tell the doctor everything. I just wanted medication, give me the drugs, and make this go away, was what was going through my mind. So after about 5 months of being on the medication and things still weren't better, I called the first therapist that I knew of, and I was with this guy for 18 months. He didn't understand postpartum mood disorders. It was never mentioned. Postpartum OCD was never brought up. While I felt it was helpful for me to talk to somebody about these thoughts and images, I still felt really alone and didn't understand what was going on. And even though I didn't feel like I was completely better, I started to feel like I should try to have another baby. So I went back to my doctor and we talked about it, and he said, sure, you can go off your medication and start trying. So that's what I did, and things kind of started going downhill after I went off my meds. Like bad headaches, my mood was going downhill, I kept feeling like I was going to pass out, and I didn't want to be alone with my kids anymore, so I didn't really care. I wanted to put this behind me and just move on with my life, so we kept trying to get pregnant, and after about 7 months, I was tired of it, and I went back to the doctor, and he diagnosed me with premenstrual dysphoric disorder and gave me a prescription for more medication. And I was devastated again. I left the office in tears, not knowing what to do, and so I debated whether or not I was going to go back on the medication for a couple of weeks, and then we found out, January 2010, I was pregnant. And this time we were thrilled, and I was excited, and I think, the PMDD symptoms kind of went away, and I went in for an early ultrasound around 7 weeks and found out that the pregnancy was not viable. And, my life just kind of came crashing down on me at that point. The thoughts and images that used to be in my mind, they kind of started happening outside of my body. I had 2 of these episodes, and the first one, it was just a few days after I'd found out that I was going to lose the baby. I was standing in my bathroom, and I was upset, and I was crying, and I picked something up off the counter, and I threw it as hard as I could, and then I looked up in the mirror, and I saw it shatter, and I looked down at my arms, and they were covered in cuts, and so I knew I had to get out of the bathroom. As I was walking out of my bedroom and down the hallway, there was holes punched in the walls, and I just kept walking. I knew that once I was around other people, I would be okay. The second episode happened a few weeks after I had miscarried. And my husband didn't know about this until about a month ago. At least he didn't know the details of what had happened. But it was Easter Sunday. We were over at my in-laws' house having dinner. And after I ate my dinner, I ran to the computer to hide and just kind of check out, and hoping that everyone was just going to leave me alone. And a while later, my husband came in, and he said, I don't know if you care to be around anybody tonight, but your children are in the other room going through their Easter baskets. And, in that moment, I realized how hurt and frustrated he had been with everything that was going on. And, I've learned that you really can't give up what you don't have. And that night, I did not have anything to give. But I didn't want to hurt him anymore. And so I got up and I went into the other room with everybody and watched the kids go through their Easter baskets. And it didn't feel like I was really there. And as we were cleaning up, I was looking at my daughter, and her face started to kind of spin in circles, and bruises started to appear on her face. And I was able to look away, and because I knew if I kept looking, it was going to get really bad, and I was going to see a monster. And so I wasn't able to look at my kids for days after that. I knew at this point, okay, there's no debating, you're going on medication, and I also knew it's time to find a new therapist. A friend of mine that happens to be friends with Christy Hibbert had stopped by my house to see how I was doing. I said, I'm not good. I found out I'm going to have this miscarriage. And she said, well, I have this friend. She lives in Flagstaff, but there's this thing called the Warm Line and the, APWC. And so I said, I'll look it up. And I think I emailed Christy that night and asked if there was someone down here that I could see that would be able to help me. And 10 days after I had my miscarriage, I found myself in Michelle Lacey's office. Did they meet her today? Yes. Okay, so she's tough to work with, but she is amazing, and she kicked my butt. After 4 years of not knowing what was going on, it was so nice to finally have a diagnosis. She told me about postpartum OCD. I could research it and learn about other women's experiences. And I didn't feel alone anymore. And when I first started seeing Michelle, she asked me, how does it make you feel to know that other women have gone through this? And like I said, at that point it had been 4 years, and so I basically told her, I don't care about everyone else. You need to make this go away right now. And so she pointed to a magic wand on her shelf that's not really magic, and she said, you know what? I can't just wave it and make everything go away. She said, you have to own everything that you've been through and, take responsibility for your recovery. And she said, you can't place that on anybody but yourself. And so that's what I did. I worked with Michelle for 2 years, and, I got better. 5 months ago, I made the decision to start seeing a marriage and family therapist. Michelle and I, we had talked about everything that we could talk about, and I had recovered from the postpartum OCD, but I still felt like there was, a lot of work that I still had to do. So together, me and my husband go, and we're picking up the pieces and we're putting our lives back together. I think we're finally starting to feel safe enough to share our experiences with each other, and it's bringing us closer together. And I know that, even though my husband didn't know what was going on for a couple of years, without his love and support and just being there, I would not have been able to get through it. And in August, Dr. Hibbert, she posted a question on Facebook just asking how everyone was doing with, their kids going back to school. And, this was my response. I said, I had a panic attack sending my kids back to school this year, totally unexpected. In the past, I've been more than happy to send my kids to school, and this time I missed them a lot. I think that this means after 6 years of this experience with PPOCD, I'm finally feeling the love that I knew that I had for my children. Woohoo! Anyways, I think this panic attack showed me just how alone I had really been throughout this whole experience. And I know that that's kind of how I needed it to be. I had to back away from everything and everybody around me just so I felt safe and knew that everyone else was safe. But I know that it didn't have to be like that. There are resources available to women. And there just really was no reason for me to feel so alone and feel like I had to be silent. So that's why I think it's important that we raise awareness about these issues, and so that moms can understand the postpartum period and not be afraid to ask for help, right away when they need it. And I'm just thankful to you for being here and for your interest in this topic. And thank you for listening to our story.
Do you want me to go now, or do you want questions for her? I can go. Okay. I'm Rob, and I'm very happy to be here as well. I just want to say how proud I am of my wife for her strength, her courage, and getting through this and in working with others to try and help educate. I've been so proud of the improvements that she has been able to make, where she's at now, and she's been a wonderful support to me. As she mentioned, my experience was very different, primarily because she didn't tell me what she was going through for a couple years. You might think, like, how could you not know? She hit it really well. She had gone through some depression issues before we ever had kids, before we were even married, and so thought maybe she's just down, maybe, when I would notice something, but I definitely didn't know anything was going on. In the postpartum spectrum, like she said, by the time that she did tell me, it'd been a couple years since we had our last child, so it didn't really make sense that it would be a postpartum issue. I just related it more to a depression issue. And so it was a little different from watching those dads in the video. Definitely brought back some very raw emotions. At the same time, it was a little different just because by the time that we were working with this, there wasn't a little baby to care for. So I think our experience, or my experience, was a little different on that respect, and it wasn't our first child either, so it wasn't the whole overwhelming new parent, little baby to care for. So in some ways, I was grateful that she, I felt, it was helpful for me, the stages that we worked through this and the way we learned about it. At the same time, it produced a lot of feelings of guilt for me because she wasn't able to talk to me about it. And so just from a relationship perspective, I felt like she couldn't trust me or didn't think that I could help. And so for a long, initially and throughout it, I dealt with a lot of feelings of guilt and shame that this was my fault, that somehow I wasn't supportive to her or a good husband or good enough to help her through this. So that was one of the hardest things for me to struggle with, was always going back to the insecurity and the guilt that, maybe this is my fault, maybe this doesn't have anything to do with postpartum or hormones or our children, maybe it's just me. And so just a lot of insecurities from not knowing. And so like was pointed out in the presentation, I think just the lack of education is the hardest part. When my wife first came to me and told me, I didn't know anything about postpartum mood disorders. And what little I did know about are the extreme cases where you hear that a mother has harmed herself or harmed her children. So I'm feeling a lot of fear on the extreme end, and everything else in between, I'm not really knowing, what was going on. And initially, she didn't tell me a whole lot. Just, this is what the doctor said, and I've been struggling for a couple years. And so again, for a long time, I think I just related it to, well, this just sounds like a depression thing that you need to get over. You just need to pick yourself up and move on, type of thing. And slowly, and like I said, I'm thankful that she did it slowly, because I would not have been able to handle, everything at once. Hey, look, I'm having hallucinations or out-of-body experiences, or I want to harm our children. That would have probably really, really scared me and freaked me out. I was scared enough without knowing those things, and I don't know if I would have been able to handle those things. So it was kind of nice to learn about it in the way that I feel bad because so much of it was on her by herself, but to learn about it in stages. And so, I'll get to that in a minute, but as far as was pointed out in the notes there, that it has a huge impact on the relationship and the family. Pretty much every aspect of our marriage was affected by it. I did, like some of those dads, I kind of felt like a single dad through part of it. I felt like it was me and the kids. And with small kids, what do you tell them? About, well, mommy just needs to rest. And so there was a lot of times when, to protect herself from these thoughts or from these images, that she needed us to just be gone, for her to be home alone. And so we did that a lot. And so there was a lot of feelings of, after a while, it's just me and the kids going everywhere, and you're always having to explain to people why your wife's not there, and you kind of just, that loneliness feeling, I think, was the hardest part for me, and ironically for her. Here we are both feeling completely lonely, and yet we had each other, but we weren't in a place where she felt like she could share with me, and she was way too fragile and emotional, I felt like, to be with her. So we just, we were growing apart rather than, I was trying to do everything I could for her. I hope she felt that. She was trying to do everything that she could for me and for the children, and yet we both felt completely isolated. I think as she got into really getting the help she needed, it was reassuring, but the loneliness for me actually even increased, because I felt like, well, she's going to therapy, and she's seeing people, and she's talking about it, and she has a diagnosis, but it's just me and the kids. And I didn't feel like, it's not something you call your buddies and talk about, And I didn't have anybody to talk about. I didn't feel like I had very many people, even within my family circle, that it was safe to really explain what was going on. And so I think that was the hardest part for me, was just feeling like, like some of those dads said, like I had lost my wife. It had been going on for a while now, and you start to wonder, maybe this isn't ever going to get better. Maybe this is just how it is. And so there just wasn't, I felt like I needed help and support. And along the way, I wish I had done it more, but one of the biggest things that helped was just the education. There's just so many resources. I wish we had known about so many of the things that my wife now participates in and helps with then. I mean, the internet alone obviously is a great resource for just looking up and realizing this is something that's real. This isn't just a mood swing, right down to the specific thoughts and images that other women are experiencing these exact same things. And it was reassuring for me to know, you know what, this is happening to a lot of people. They're dealing with it. There is help for it. And so while it was scary to find out more and more from her and from what could happen, it calmed my fears, just because when you don't know, when you're ignorant, you're scared of everything and you're just unaware of what's going on. Some of the things that were the most helpful, like I said, just the education. That was so key to understanding. You know, I wish that I had have participated in some sort of support group or dad's group, but just reading online and chat forums and other things to find out, you know what, other people are making it through this. Another thing that eventually really helped to open the lines of communication for us was for me to go to some of these therapy sessions with her. You know, kind of, I mentioned how alone you feel, and not really, like, I knew she was getting help, but she still wasn't at a place where we were talking openly about what was going on. And so just as a guy, as it was mentioned, I just want to fix it. I want to know what's going on, you know, I want to know, okay, well, let me meet with these people and see why they're not fixing it, you know. And it was helpful to go with the different therapists that she's been with, not all the time, but to go every once in a while. Okay, now I know who you're meeting with. I know what you talk about. I know what you discuss. And most importantly, it just facilitated conversations between us two, because here we have, you know, a moderator now that can say, now, Julie, is there some things you want to talk about? Is there some things that I want to talk about that we didn't even feel safe talking about on our own at home, because we weren't sure how we could handle it, how we could get those feelings out. So it really opened those communication lines for us. Another obviously huge help was, as she mentioned, her teenage brother and sister lived with us. That was a great blessing for us. It was hard to have teenagers and little kids at the same time, but for me, I would not have been able to go through it. Watching some of the other dads, it was to know I could go to work, or I could do the things that I still had to do, and that there was somebody home to help her with the kids, that there was somebody to help with meals if she needed it, to take the kids to the park to play. So crucial. And my heart aches for the people that sometimes call the line and say, I have nobody, you know, there's nobody to help, and because you could not get through it alone. So family was a big help. And like I said, though, it's hard because there's certain people you feel comfortable sharing things with and certain people that you don't. So even among family, it was tricky to know which ones. And lastly, just like my wife has said, ironically, it's just opened up such a better relationship for us, because as we learned how to get through postpartum together and all these issues that lasted for a few years now, we started to say, okay, well, we've worked on this, and like she said, now we're meeting with a marriage and family therapist, that we're working on so many other aspects of our relationship that I don't think would have ever come up if we had not gone through postpartum together, because we would have just, neither one of us were real great communicators. We were happy, we were just going where we were, whereas this is just, it's opened us up to be much more closer emotionally. And I'm so proud of the way that it's healing for me to see her work with the Warm Line, to see her take support calls, to see her go to the therapy groups that she goes to, not so much for her anymore, but to support other people. You know, makes me want to do the same with other dads and just let people know that what I wanted to know when we were early on in the stages, that there's help, and that, you know, you do get through it. And, you know, someone asked the question earlier, you know, what if it never goes away, or it takes a long time. And I wish someone maybe had just said to me, you know, this isn't going to be like a 16-week course and then you're fixed. This could be, you know, because in my mind I'm like, you know, intensive therapy, you should be able to get over something in 3 or 4 months. You know, this could be something that could take like 3 or 4 years. Or what about if it takes 5 years, you know? That would be a scary proposition, but at the same time, I think it's the reality sometimes that, you know what, it does get better. And in our case, even taking that long, so many other things have gotten better with it and have been able to be worked out with it. So I love you.
I love you.
All right, does anybody have any questions? Can I ask, in hindsight, do you see symptoms or things that you did really early on that perhaps would have made a phone call to a physician or somebody. She was just talking about the length of time that, you know, it went on. And clearly you were doing things with the children, I mean, and she was, you know. showing
Definitely
some
not,
signs.
definitely not to the degree of knowing anything was drastically wrong. Like I said, I'm sure during those times I thought there were days where she was more moody or more depressed, but there was no indication whatsoever of her wanting to harm herself or the children. I didn't know anything until at that point about any type of intrusive thoughts. It was just, okay, so this is, you know, what they call the baby blues, or, you know, we'll just keep going through it. And again, she hit it very well. That was the hardest thing. When she told me, I was like, well, what are you talking about? You seem fine to me. You know, it was such a blindsided thing that I felt like, how could I have missed that? But she was very good at holding everything inside.
Can you talk a little bit about that, Julie? Like, was that a conscious decision that you were trying to hide, or did you feel like you just didn't know what to say? I mean, what was it like for you?
It was definitely a conscious decision. I felt like, you know, I've been through enough crap in my life that this is not going to stop me, and I'm not going to bring it up. I'm going to get through this, if it's hormonal or whatever. Eventually it's going to get better. And I didn't want to affect him or, you know, anybody else.
And for both of us, you know, as I hear other people's stories, when you have a thought of harming your child, you know, it's natural. I'm not going to tell anybody. They're going to take away my children. They're going to lock me up. And that's like the thing, you know, when they give you that little baby blues speech in the hospital before you leave, hey, if you're feeling a little moody or sleep, you know, they need to be real and be like, if this happens, you can call someone and they're not going to lock you up or take your baby. You know, these are real things. And, you know, I can see why she didn't want, you know, you can't come out and tell somebody that doesn't know, hey, I'm thinking of harming my children, because I would have picked up the phone and called 911.
Was there anybody that you shared that with? I mean, not even like a best friend or your sister that was living with you? You just kept that all inside?
And I have to say, the only reason I asked that question was because in the area that I work in, we do have these conversations with patients and families and couples, and any advice or the right verbiage to use to make this a real problem, a real issue that we need to address. I mean, we talk to parents about warning signs for their babies. We talk to them about high fevers. We talk to them about these things that are important, but yet we also need to realize that we need to put some significant emphasis on this. And you know, it's just obviously come to the forefront. You know, we are our educator and a lot of this coalition and whatnot, but I ask that only to help.
Yeah, and I'm not an expert on the different levels, especially when you enter into postpartum psychosis, but it seems like for me, the part that I want to like get out to people is there's a big difference between having thoughts of wanting to harm your baby and not liking those thoughts and not wanting to act on those thoughts, and having those thoughts and thinking that it's a good idea. And that's, the latter is the cases where we hear about in the news, but because no differentiation is usually explained to people, it's kind of like, if I'm having those thoughts, I'm at risk, when I don't think she was, you know, she never enjoyed those thoughts. She never thought that that would be a good idea. She never heard a voice that, hey, this is the right thing to do. She had those thoughts and was terrified of them, which is, you know, why she never, and as those started to come out, I met with, you know, meeting with her therapist, they reassured me, let me assure you, she doesn't want these thoughts, you know, she doesn't, these are scary to her as well, and so she knows that they're irrational thoughts and not something that she would act out on, but still scary.
I don't know who this question's for exactly, but are there support groups for dads? You know, no?
Not much. I mean, in Tucson, they had one going, and I'm not sure if it's even still going now, but do you guys know for Tucson? I know they had one for a while. It's hard for dads to go, you know, it's hard for them to want to go. Although I'm sitting here thinking what we need is guys like you who are willing to help on the warm line.
Well, and that's
Talk to
everyone,
dads.
she's gotten a couple calls where a dad needed help, or a
Wow.
dad needed someone to talk to, and she said, you know, she'll come talk to me, hey, would you be willing to talk? I'm willing, and they'll never call back, or they won't return my message, and it's hard. I think generally it's stereotypically harder for guys to talk about, but I wish that I could have talked one-on-one with somebody else, or even watched that video
I know.
before, you know, to be like, oh, there's other guys that made it through.
And I do. I send that home with a lot of clients and with our group members because sometimes that's the only way that the dad is into any kind of education. And they will watch a video versus, there's actually a book too called The Postpartum Husband, which is really skinny and it has bullet points. So it's easy and quick to read. But, you know, just like they don't want to sit and read a big long book about it. They just want the bullet points. So that's a great resource too for dads. And also, I mean, we do have support groups around the city and the state. There are lots of support groups in Tucson. There's some great support groups here. Tammy, our treasurer, runs a support group out in the East Valley.
And we allow dads to come in. So
What's that?
Like, as long as.
And that's
the-
what we do, yeah.
Yeah, as long as the other participants that are there are okay with having, you know, someone's husband come in, we usually clear it with everybody that's there. And then the husband can sit in, because sometimes it's just nice for them to know that their wife isn't the only one that's going through this. Sometimes just being able to see other women going through it is, you know, enough for them to, you know, at least change their opinion and be a little more supportive.
Do you ever have dads come back again?
Not usually,
Yeah,
just
same
the
here.
ones, yeah.
So how do you get the clearance? Would you say next week, would it be okay?
No, we ask the gentleman to step out of the room, and then I just, you know, close the door and I ask them. If anybody's not comfortable, then, you know, and it's the same thing as if we have visitors, we have students, we have different people that want to come and sit into the group to know what it's about, but we get everybody's clearance that's there, because it's very private, you know, personal information that they're sharing, and so if they don't want that to be shared, then, you know, then we tell them, sorry, can you come back another week, and then, if you can come back next week, and then we'll let everybody know, hey, whoever's going to be here next week, then we're inviting this person in if you don't feel comfortable. So.
And we'll talk tomorrow when we talk about therapy, about couples therapy. But, you know, I encourage everybody, I'm big on including the dads as much as possible. I think what you said is a great point, that when they can come in and see what the treatment's all about and be part of it, then they know what to do, and they know how to help, and they understand what's going on. So, you know, I think we're trained in all our professions, probably just focus on who's in front of us. But like I said earlier, we need to remember that family perspective and include kids, parents. You know, I've had mothers-in-law come in with postpartum moms, or mothers. You know, I've had mothers literally have to physically bring their daughters to the support group and sit in on the group, and it helps because then they understand what's going on. Sisters have come before. You know, so however we can involve the family, I think is a wonderful resource, because there aren't a lot of resources specifically for the family members, unfortunately. But there are some, and there's a lot of online resources for dads.
I just want to say thanks for coming, because I think that's really awesome that you could share your experiences. And what I think that I really got from this is how complicated things are when they unfold. And like, we have all these, you know, postpartum depression is this, postpartum blues is this, postpartum OCD is this, and it seems very clear cut, and the diagnoses seem all like, these are the risk factors, these are the risks, this is how long it. But when I hear from you guys is that it's so complicated, you have no idea what's going on while it's happening. Like, it comes at you in this abstract form with these feelings and emotions, and, you know, to then put it on paper and see things, it's not how patients, it's not how men and women experience life. Like, it's just very ambiguous, it seems, and that is something we get from hearing her story, I think.
And of course, it's very different in hindsight, looking back and be able to, okay, let's write down along the way. Yeah, it's just like, you know, she used to get dizzy every time she went to Target, and I'm like, okay, that doesn't make any sense, you know. Like, you know, and there's so much that just like, okay, things are not making sense. That's not on the list of symptoms, dizzy at Target, so.
And I agree with you, like, I'm at the bedside with these moms, and I wish there is a way that we can be more direct and saying, you know, I have worked with women who have thought of putting their children in the washing machine. Like, be more specific of these bizarre thoughts I worked at the hospital last year where we did the whole questionnaire on the mom, and she did go home and a week later take her own life. And she answered those questions, but to just be a little more direct in letting them know that this is real and that things happen after you have a baby in your body that you have no control over, but you do have control over your voice and being able to use that. And for you to educate yourself, I commend you, because not many men would do that. They just want to fix it, and if they can't, then they'll go to work so they can provide and, you know, push through it. And so I commend you for just wanting to educate yourself, because that, I see how important a partner is in that healing process through what you, just how you expressed your support.
I mean, there was like one specific podcast that I don't even know what therapist it was from, but it was just, you know, a woman's talking, and when I heard her story, and it was just like my wife's, just that one little thing was like, okay, you know, this is helping to, like you said, to just be real about the real specific, because we sugarcoat it, and just, and then when you have a really bad thought, like putting your baby in the, you know, who are you gonna tell? You don't feel safe even telling your doctor about that. You know, you don't feel safe telling your family about that.
And rightly so. There's unfortunately way too many stories of
Yeah.
really bad things happening when you do tell, so.
Yeah.
Great, very good.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
So we'll take 5 more minutes and you guys can, there's more food. Feel free to go and get that. Whoever is thinking of warm line volunteering or